Self-driving cars are predicted to dramatically reduce traffic accidents and fatalities by removing human error from the driving equation. Plus, there may be all sorts of other benefits: eased road congestion, decreased harmful emissions, and minimized unproductive and stressful driving time. But accidents can and will still happen, and when they do, their outcomes may be determined months or years in advance by programmers or policymakers. And they'll have some difficult decisions to make. It's tempting to offer up general decision-making principles like minimize harm, but even that quickly leads to morally murky decisions. For example, let's say we have the same initial setup, but now there's a motorcyclist wearing a helmet to your left and another one without a helmet to your right. Which one should your robot car crash into? If you say the biker with the helmet because she's more likely to survive, then aren't you penalizing the responsible motorist? If instead you say the biker without the helmet because he's acting irresponsibly, then you've gone way beyond the initial design principle about minimizing harm, and the robot car is now meting out street justice. The ethical considerations get more complicated here. In both of our scenarios, the underlying design is functioning as a targeting algorithm of sorts. In other words, it's systematically favoring or discriminating against a certain type of object to crash into. And the owners of the target vehicles will suffer the negative consequences of this algorithm through no fault of their own. Our new technologies are opening up many other novel ethical dilemmas. For instance, if you had to choose between a car that would always save as many lives as possible in an accident, or one that would save you at any cost, which would you buy? What happens if the cars start analyzing and factoring in the passengers of the cars and the particulars of their lives? Could it be the case that a random decision is still better than a predetermined one designed to minimize harm? And who should be making all of these decisions anyhow? Programmers? Companies? Governments? Reality may not play out exactly like our thought experiments, but that's not the point. They're designed to isolate and stress test our intuitions on ethics, just like science experiments do for the physical world. Spotting these moral hairpin turns now will help us maneuver the unfamiliar road of technology ethics and allow us to cruise confidently and conscientiously into our brave new future.
I thought it was a cool video. You guys like it?
Yeah.
I think it makes you think, right? I mean, we all think, wow, the first thing I think of, driverless car, I want one. I want to be able to read my paper while I'm going to the coffee shop, you know. But this really makes you think about how you build that car and what policy decisions you make, and that makes a big difference. So what is ethics? And actually, how many of you have taken an ethics course? Oh. Well, actually, it's probably worth the time. I mean, a lot of the issues that these technologies bring are like not decided by technology, they're decided by, you know, human interests. And so ethics is really the shortest definition I could find of standards of behavior that help us decide how to act in a range of situations. What ethics is not religion, right? Because religion is a lot bigger. It's not law, because law applies to everybody, not to the individual. It's not science, because science doesn't provide values, it just provides data. It's not culture, because some cultures can be wrong, and you can look at history to see that from, you know, World War II to World War I to some, you know, before that. And it's not feelings, because the right choice may be uncomfortable. So what are some of the ethical frameworks that people use to think about these kind of issues? I'm going to put 5 up that are really common, and you hear them a lot, but they're not necessarily the only ones. So the first one is utilitarian, which is what produces the most good and the least harm. You hear that a lot. It may not be applicable, but you have to think through that. That's a very common justification. Rights, what respects the rights of all the stakeholders? Justice, what treats people equally or proportionately? Common good, what serves the community versus the few? You know, so this is a very common argument. You go, you know, should CEOs make $5 million a year? You know, is that for the common good? Or is it just for a few people? You hear that argument a lot. And finally, virtue, which not a lot of people talk about, but is sort of, what kind of person do I want to be when I make my decision in terms of the thing I'm building or the policy I'm trying to push through? And so when you apply ethics to these kind of problems, first you have to recognize the ethical issue. And that's hard because sometimes you go like, okay, here's an example. You argue, I'm in favor of the death penalty, right? Because I think it prevents crime in the future. And then somebody says, I disagree with you. Because I don't think it disagrees, it reduces crime. What kind of question is that? Is that an ethical question? It's not an ethical question, it's a factual question, right? Does it reduce crime? If you're arguing on that basis, that's not an ethics issue. That's a fact issue. So recognize the ethical issue, recognize the ethical framework that you're using versus the other person who's majorly opposed to you, the benefits, the extrinsic concerns, and I put up very common is EHS, which stands for environment, health, and safety. Those are the three major things, but there's issues of human rights and so on. We have power analysis. Who gets more power from your decision, your intervention? And who gets unempowered? Form of life analysis. You know, in history, when they invented the car, the automobile, I don't think they realized how much change it brought. You're talking about reliance on oil. You're talking about changing where people work, that they can drive to work. You're changing about building infrastructure like the highways, the pollution, and so on. So really, all that kind of stuff comes from a simple invention, right? Intrinsic concerns. Here's a good one in technology, because a lot of technologists, when they've been very successful, what is the typical response when you've been very successful? Let's say you're Mark Zuckerberg, not so much Mark, but let's say you're somebody who's really made it. Your feeling is like, I can solve any problem, right? That's hubris, that's pride. And so you see a lot of these really crazy ventures where they go out and think they can solve the problems of the world using technology, and many of those problems are not technology-based. So hubris, disrespect for nature, things like that, they're very interesting. You can see that in the news a lot. Identify alternatives. Alternatives may not be as technologically sophisticated. So, for instance, if you go to India, China, they use technologies on a very simple level, but it's very effective. It's very frugal. It's not like here, and I'll talk a little bit about the issues there, where you have access to everything you want. Make a decision and go get a gut check. You know, how does it feel when you make that decision? Is it right? And finally, reflect on the outcome. Act and reflect. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to go through a number of technologies that are happening today or in the last 2 or 3 years, and some of those that are in research that will happen in the next couple of years, just to give you an idea of the breadth. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the ethics. And so I want you to be thinking about the ethics of all these things, because I really want it to be a little bit interactive, so that you can think about some of the issues that you'll be dealing with, and your kids will be dealing with when you grow old, and it's not that far away. They say that by 2025, which is how many years away? Not very far away. 1/4 of the people alive at that time will live to over 100. And they're aiming for 120, 150. That's going to change society a lot, if you think about it. So let's go with our review. The first is the area of telemedicine. Telemedicine has been around for a while, but it has 4 different forms. The first one is live video, where you talk with the doctor, sort of on TV, like Skype. The second is store and forward, where you send a photo or a video to your doctor or to a specialist. The third is where this is very interesting. This area is remote monitoring, which is where people are going home with these devices that are measuring the blood pressure, the weight, and so on. It's connected to the internet, and so you get this data feed to your provider. And finally, guided self-service, and this is becoming more important. Guided self-service is sort of something the government has been pushing. And so when you get older, you start working for an employer, or you start your own company, the government is now pushing you to make your own decisions on healthcare. and allowing you to take your health plan from employer to employer, unlike before. Before, people used to take, because like we worked at Kaiser, which I did for a long time, they give you 3 plans and you pick one. So now you can take a plan with you. What that means is that a lot of patients, a lot of consumers like ourselves have to make the decisions, who will be the best doctor for me? And a lot of patients, unfortunately, are not ready to do that. The next revolution is mobile apps. If you think about mobile apps, there's over 100,000 medical or healthcare apps or fitness apps, even though there's only 100 that are FDA approved. But a lot of these apps reflect the fact that we're all concerned about our health, right? That's one of the major concerns we have. And the mobile phone is something that everyone has now. It's over 80%, almost 90% of American public has a smartphone. If you look at some of these apps, like this is a sleep app, helps you sleep, analyzes your sleep actually, tells you wakes you up when you're in the right state of sleep, so you don't wake up grouchy. Number 2 is actually an ultrasound. It's a wand that you attach to your smartphone, and you can do an ultrasound of a baby or a heart or whatever. And you know, that replaces a machine that's about the size of this podium, which costs about $20,000. That's pretty amazing. Then we have Cellscope, which came out of Berkeley. How many of you guys have heard of Cellscope? Francis has. We actually saw them at Kaiser. They were started at Berkeley by undergraduates. They just attach a little thing to your iPhone to look inside your ear to see if you have ear infection. This is great because if you have kids, or you know somebody has kids, they always cry at 4 in the morning, you know, always. And they wake you up and you go like, I wonder if little Johnny has an ear infection. Do I really want to drive down to the emergency room and wait there 4 hours to find out? No, I don't. So you stick that thing on there, you take a picture and you send it to the doctor, and they look at it and say, oh, I'll bring him in the morning. It looks okay. So that's very, very good. So this little thing down here is a glucometer. Glucometers used to be big, and if you're a diabetic, you'll know that. But this glucometer is the size of a flash drive. You just stick in your phone, take the blood test, and you can send the results to your physician. And this is an EKG that's built into the case of the phone. So you hold it, and you get the EKG live, sent to your physician. Of course, it's a funny story. There is a physician in San Diego who loves this technology. His name is Eric Topol, and he's like a world famous guy, right? So he writes about the future of medicine. So he's writing, he loves this company. It's called AliveCore, and he has one in his pocket. So he always tells stories like when he goes to conferences and he says, when I was flying in a plane, some guy had a heart attack and I whipped up my phone and did that, and he's a cardiologist. So he keeps telling those stories, like that's happened to him a couple of times, so the lesson is never take a flight with Eric Topol because you don't know who's going to have a heart attack on the phone. Because I've taken a lot of flights, I've never seen a heart attack, so it's kind of weird. But the problem with this technology is that let's say you're having a heart attack, what do you do about it? You call the 911. So unless you're a cardiologist, even a cardiologist can't do very much without the medicine, without everything else, oxygen and so on. And finally, this little device down here, see that little blue thing down there? It's a pulse oximeter, so it measures your oxygen level. That used to be a professional device. Now you can buy it online, at a store. Pretty amazing. Wearables is another hot topic, another hot trend, has been for a couple of years. You see they take different forms, like a headband, a wristband. This is the first and only FDA-approved wristband from a company called Empatica. Here's earbuds that she's wearing. You can listen to music on them, but they also measure your vital signs and potentially your blood pressure, just for your earbuds. And so it's like, think about it. You're using your stuff every day. You don't even see the devices, right? You don't even think about it. They're just monitoring you passively. There's a Nike Plus shoe, which measures your heart rate when you're running. Here's a device from Sculpt that measures your muscle quality. So it's much better for measuring how overweight you are than just BMI. Here's a ring sensor. It came from Berkeley. And a friend of mine started this startup, which is, it's got a little clip on your shirt, and you slouch, it buzzes. So of course, I look around, everybody's going like this. But it's pretty cool. Here's a tattoo sensor.
Jeez.
It's amazing. It's less than the width of a hair. You just paste it in your skin. You can measure pressure. And it has a transmitter to send it to your smartphone. So the first product that came out of this is Reebok's, I think it's called a checkpoint or check something, check light. So they have this head sock you put in your head, and you play football, right? So kids do this. Kids play a lot of football. And when they get hit, the question that always has been, how can the coach tell whether to have them sit in a bench or send them back in? Because when you get a concussion, you get trauma, it may not appear right away, right? So a lot of kids have gotten in trouble doing that because coaches are not physicians. They send the kids back in, they get more trauma, and then they end up in the hospital. And a lot of people even argue we shouldn't even have football less than age 12, something like that. So they built this head sock, you put it on, so you get hit by somebody, and all of a sudden, at the back of the helmet, there's like a red, yellow, and green line. Right? It's a score. And so it tells you, like, this kid can go back in, this kid should sit down. Pretty cool. Some wearables are becoming like jewelry. So you know that they're starting to become mainstream, right? When they start to be worn for their design as opposed to the function. Here's a Band-Aid that measures sweat molecules. So it measures a lot of things in sweat. Here's an insole that tells when somebody's unsteady on their feet. So one of the big problems with, if you have elderly parents or grandparents, they fall. Now this has a computer in it, so when they get unsteady, you can get to them before they fall. Very cool. Because once they fall, you know, there's always a lot of ads about these pendant alarms. When you fall, hit the button. So once you fall, you're like, you know, where's that button? So you want to do it before you fall. Of course, this is a baby sensor suit, and this came out. This is actually a glove, a surgical glove. It has electronic sensors on it, so it enables the surgeon to have a much keener sense of touch, and actually allows the surgeon. You can actually have a computer tell the surgeon this is where the tumor is, you know, just by feedback.
Oh.
Pretty cool.
Wait, is it tactile feedback or
Yeah.
is it, wow.
It's really, I mean, that's why I'm saying this stuff just is almost like Star Trek, if you remember the old series Star Trek. It's stuff that used to be science fiction. Here's a teddy bear. You know, I'm a pediatrician, so when you try to take vital signs in a kid, what do? Give you one chance. They cry. So when they cry, all the vital signs go out of kilter, right? The heart rate goes up and breathing goes up, everything like that. So what happens is somebody designed a whole bunch of sensors into this teddy bear. So when they hold the teddy bear, it's actually measuring the heart rate, the pulse oximeter, everything's being measured as they would be, you know. So, and here's a glucometer that's been approved by the FDA to stay in the skin for 7 days, so it can measure your glucose up and down. And here are some shoes. Here's an interesting shoe. This shoe has actually got sonar built into it, so it's for blind folks. So when they put the shoe on and they're walking, and there's an obstacle in front, the shoe will buzz on one side or the other, telling them to turn. So they can walk. And finally, they're becoming very disposable. This is a disposable sensor. And of course, how many of you heard about Google's contact lens project? It's pretty cool. It's a glucometer and a contact lens. So you measure glucose in the tears to replace glucose in your blood. So no more blood sticks. That'll be the day. User interface is another area that's really taken off. Here's gesture-based computing. This is a picture of a surgeon in this OR using Connect. You guys know Connect, right? The gesture-based beam. So he's using Connect to control the surgical instruments and stuff. Here is a gaze tracking unit. So you put it under your screen. You see the tiny little thing right there, and it can tell where you're looking. So that like where you look can tell the computer how you're thinking, right? So the idea, for instance, you look here, you look here, you look here, you look here. The computer goes, oh, this person's confused. I'm going to pop up a help screen. So you think about things like that. This is a mind reading unit from NeuroSky. It's an EEG headset. So now you can control video games just by a thought. So you know, video games are interesting. People are using their feet, their hands. Now they're thinking, where they're looking. Like they're totally immersed in the game. You know, they control all kinds of stuff. You know? So very interesting. speech recognition. Here's a Surface table from one of the Japanese companies. The Surface table is going to kids are drawing. It's like a big tablet, but the idea is that that the computer is part of your world. That is, it's not like a computer. It's just part of your world. Like, this year I saw there was a smart fridge at CES, and I said, I want that fridge. Because the fridge can tell you how to cook what you need to cook with what's inside the fridge. It's like, I don't know worry about my menus anymore. The fridge just tells you, with this kind of 3D old milk, you got this cheese over here, this is what you can do with it. So that's pretty cool. And then the last one is interesting. This is from an Israeli company where they have a microphone in your car or in a noisy environment that has a camera built in. So the camera looks at your lips. So if your lips don't move, it shuts it down. So the signal to noise ratio is very high, very good for it's like listening in a quiet room. It's pretty amazing. These are the augmented and virtual reality headsets that are coming out. There are a lot of them coming out. You guys know what this is? Augmented reality, virtual reality. This is a Microsoft version called HoloLens. ODG is probably the most advanced unit on the market. This is an industrial unit. Here's another one from Polo Sear. This is a woman in China who has a headset on to, it's a phobia therapy. So she's scared of heights. So she's putting this on and she's going like this. You know. So the idea is you get exposed to it and you get used to it. And that's what she's doing. And this, I don't know how many of you have tried this app called WordLens. You can get it from the store, it's free. It's a real-time translation. So like you hold it up to like a sign at the airport, it translates to whatever language you want, including Chinese. So it's like, okay, you can imagine going to a hospital and you have a sign and you don't speak English. So you put the thing up, oh, okay. That is very amazing. And finally, this thing I saw this year, this is actually a suit that mimics what you would feel if you were 40 years older. So if you wear the suit, your limbs are not as flexible, you can't see as well. So can you imagine something like this where you can really get a sense of empathy for what people go through when they're older, you know? And in fact, I think something like this would be really good if you're a designer or developer to understand your market. And the elderly market is one that's been ignored, but it's going to really pick up, I think, soon. The other trend is big data. You guys have heard of that, big data? Data everywhere. Those are some of the stats. There's like 600,000 emails per second or something like that. It's like this thing, you know. Customers who bought this item also bought this. It's like the Amazon thing. Can you imagine how that play out in the future? Here's an interesting study that was done because this is big data. So they looked at University of Pennsylvania looked at Twitter feeds, which you can get. So Twitter feeds to predict the risk of heart attack. And so here's what the CDC found based on traditional criteria. And this is what Twitter found in terms of risk of heart attacks in different areas, based on whether you, in your tweets, you put in positive language or negative language. If you were stressed out and put a lot of negative language, your risk of heart attack, guess what, goes way up. So they perfectly match. In fact, Twitter produced better results than the traditional criteria, the traditional risk factors. So this is like, people look and go, oh, this is what the big data is about. And that's, in a sense, that's true. And that's the hope for big data anyway. Internet of Things, you guys have heard of this. Sensors everywhere in the environment. Has a lot of medical uses. You can tell that it tracks the elderly. You see a little bit, see a sensor up there? There's a cat watching the sensor, how to get to it. And a lot of location tracking. This is a lab, actually, an apartment that's a lab, the University of Texas, where everything in the room has got a sensor, like the weight, where you go, the bed, everything else. And here's a sensor that's built into a mirror. That's coming. So like I said, the computers are becoming invisible. They're not like you have to take a laptop out. You actually wake up in the morning, you go to your bathroom becomes your computer. There's your emails, your schedule for the day, the weather, and everything else. And I saw demonstrations of that this year. the thing in your hand, the smartphone, has got a lot of processing in it. So here's an app that can tell what your pulse and respiration is just from the picture, the video camera. Because the pulse, like every time you hit a heartbeat, the color of your face changes. So the heart pumps blood up. The phone can recognize it. We can't recognize it. It can recognize it. Here's sensing your vital signs from a distance. So, for instance, you can, in a hospital, for instance, you can mount these things over patients, and you can actually sense their vital signs regardless of whether they have leads or wires or whatever. And in fact, this kind of technology is being built into things like cars. Here's a BMW that has a test one prototype, which has a reading just when you hold the steering wheel. It's measuring your vital signs. Pretty amazing. And by the way, if you're having a heart attack, it'll drive you to the hospital. So, just kidding. Just think about that. Okay, here's an automated toilet. So it measures the stuff in your urine, right? So it's good for urine infection, good for diabetes. Here's a chair sensor. So you put this under your chair, it senses your vital signs, and a couple of these other things. Here's a pad that you put under your bed that measures your heart rate, and you don't even touch it. It's actually under your bed. It's just sensing the vibration in your body. So of course, ultimately there's a smart home, and this is very commonly discussed today. Everything being connected to the internet, being coordinated, and then ultimately the smart city. And I'm actually talking with a couple of folks that have seen a lot of interest in this idea, building the smart city. When you go drive to San Francisco, how cool would it be if you could look at an app and tell you where all the parking spots are? That would be priceless, right? And how much they cost, or you can tell how much time it would take to get somewhere. Robots are another area we looked at, and the one on the upper left, that's the robot. It's called Paro. It's a companion robot. It's a baby seal. So you can see, what it responds to you. It purrs, you stroke it, and it kind of looks at you. We had one in our innovation center. You couldn't walk by without the feet. It looks like an animal, right? So you've got to pet it. And of course, it's a $6,000 animal, but you don't have to buy any pet food, so just to buy batteries. But seniors get very lonely, especially if they're widower, and so having an animal or a robot equivalent, that's called animal therapy, companionship therapy, makes a big difference. And of course, here's the telepresence robot that's in the home of the elderly. And here's an assistive robot, which is actually helping this person get a glass of water. And then this one is interesting. This is actually a professor in Singapore who designed a social robot just like her. Right? It looks just like her, a younger version. And this robot sits at the reception desk in the hospital and has its own personality. So it understands from speech recognition what you're saying. It understands your emotions and it responds appropriately. And it has a personality. So it's interesting because you can think of a couple of ethical issues that brings up. Telepresence robots for the home and hospital. We've seen a couple of videos where you project yourself long distance. Other kinds of robot. Here's an interesting one. Here's a company that has a virtual assistant. This is a fake robot. It's a virtual robot. So you have it on your cell phone. It's like you're talking to a real person, but you're not. You're talking to a very intelligent AI, artificial intelligence. And here's a surgical robot. Here's Google's driverless car. I saw this year. This is amazing. This is a drone that carries a person. You know the little drones? So this drone, I can see the future where instead of buying a car, you get a drone. Fly over the bay, see the giants. That would be so weird. Here's a pathogen-fighting nanobot. It's a microscopic robot that goes through your blood vessels and fights cancer and infection. Here's another one that swims through blood vessels. It's amazing. When you think about this kind of stuff, this is like science fiction. I mean, it really is like science fiction. You could inject these robots into your bloodstream and they'll go everywhere cleaning out the cholesterol and things like that. That is really something. Here is another page of ingestibles, injectables, and implants. here is a drug dispensing implant. One of the biggest problems we have in the US and everywhere is people don't take the medications like they're supposed to, and that accounts for like 10% of hospitalizations. So they don't take the medications because they don't like the taste, or they can't afford it, or they get better and they feel, oh, I don't need to take it anymore, right? So 80% of them don't take it. So what happens, they come back sick again, and doctor tries another medication. And of course, the cost of healthcare goes up, right? Because they end up in the hospital, they end up on much more expensive medication. So this is actually an implant. You actually put it into your body and it dispenses medication, and you can program it. And think about what kind of patients would that be for. Here's a temperature pill. So you take it, it goes through your body, and it takes a core temperature as it goes through. Some people like to be tracked, like people who go in the wilderness. So this is actually a device that's strictly for tracking. So that you get lost, you know, if you're hiking in, you know, Yellowstone or something, you get lost. This will allow people to find you. Here's a pill that has a chip in it, and you take this pill, and the chip kind of is biodigested in your stomach, and it releases a signal and tells your doctor you took that pill. You think about the effort that went into that, you know. Dentistry is an important problem, because they put so much money into developing. Every pill has an electrical circuit that tells your doctor you took that pill. That's the issue of medication compliance. Here's an interesting one. This is starfish, and what it is it's a certain kind of plastic that was developed at Johns Hopkins. It's like a starfish. So you swallow a whole bunch of it, you know, drink it, and as it goes down your GI tract, when it gets near cancer, the pH changes. The pH changes, this thing clamps down. Very cool. So it takes a piece of the cancer, goes all the way through, gets collected, and then they analyze the biopsies for cancer. What that addresses is that, and this is true for all men, you'll get to this point, at a certain age, they recommend sigmoidoscopy or colonoscopy to check for cancer, right? And nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to have a tube stuck inside, so they'd rather do this. Okay, so this is the future. Here's an artificial pancreas that was implanted to release insulin and so on, depending on your blood values. Here's a pill cam. You swallow it, it takes a video all the way through. So, it's like a selfie, but it's on the inside. And this is interesting. This one is interesting. This is a brain implant. So brain implant is, they're now starting to experiment with putting stimulators inside your brain so that you can not only affect your mood and affect your seizures and things like that, but they're now experimenting with putting memory into your brain, extra memory. So the hope and the expectation, and I couldn't believe when I read it, there are actually credible experts saying that by the year 2020, you're going to be able to download the internet directly to your brain, which is weird. That is weird. So you're walking along, I wonder what the history of this building is, and you're going, let's query. Hands-free, right? Pretty amazing. 3D printing, that's artificial skin, printed from like a 3D printer. Here's a heart valve, here's a prosthetic, kidney. Here's this guy who's pretending to like eating 3D printed noodles, meat, whatever. So you can print food, just like in the Star Trek. You have a machine, just prints any kind of food. Apparently, it's pretty bland. It doesn't taste like chicken. So the question is, what are the dilemmas? I'm sure you've thought of some of them, but I'm going to go through a couple of the big issues that, just to sort of make it real, because I think a lot of people who are doing these things really are not thinking about the future very much. And the question is, should you do it? You know, even if it can be done, should you do it? So here are some common ones. The first is privacy. When you have big data, you have issues of privacy. How many of you, I mean, I'm sure all of you belong to some social network, right? Anybody who doesn't? Email, I'm sure you guys do email. I'm sure you have online, relationships and things like that. The data surveillance that's being undertaken by the government, I was just reading about it, just incredible. They have so much power to look at your email, to look at where you are, to look at what you buy, to look at what kind of medical conditions you have. All the information can be accessed in some degree. So essentially, I think Eric Schmidt actually said, forget about privacy, it doesn't exist anymore. Right? But we still are concerned about it because people can steal your identity, people can know about you. You think you're safe in your home, you're not. People can track and know what you do. And that's a big issue, especially if you value that you want protection for that, and you want to have privacy for that. I think that's, it's interesting because what is the issue behind privacy? What is the good that can come out of the data? And this is some issue that, have you guys heard of HIPAA? HIPAA, sort of the law that protects your privacy. People are now arguing that HIPAA prevents us from doing research because you can't get the data, right? So you can't get the data, you can't get the research. So that is an issue because if you were able to look at all this data, where people shop, where they live, what they prefer, whether they exercise or not, what they eat, you could actually get a lot of insights that would make your healthcare a lot more effective, right? So there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off. For instance, I have a friend who's a diabetologist, endocrinologist. She's Filipino. She works in South San Francisco. And she has a lot of Filipino diabetic patients, a lot. So they never listen to her. She tells them to do something, they just don't do it. Until she figured it out. She figured out that in the Filipino culture, family is king, right? Family is it. So instead of telling them to do it for themselves, she started to tell them, you should do this because you want to live to see your granddaughter's wedding. And it's all of a sudden they started doing it. So that was the key, right? So that kind of data, if you understand where things are important to people, can often help you get the right intervention much more effectively. The second thing is the digital divide. Do you guys know what digital divide is? It's the gap between the technology haves and have-nots. Right? So when we design these technologies, we tend to think of it in a Silicon Valley bubble, like everybody's like us, but the world's not like us. So what's happening is that you have all these advances, but who gets to take advantage of them? Very small group, very small group. So the gap widens. And it's hard because it's not a simple issue as just giving people technology. There's a lot of issues. For instance, if people don't have food to eat, they're not going to worry about a self-actualizing app. They're not going to do that, guaranteed. They're going to worry about food, they're going to worry about money, they're going to worry about paying the rent and so on. So there's a lot of much more deeper factors they need to address. There are literacy issues, there's mental health issues, and so on. And here's a question I want to ask you guys. Maybe hear some of you guys say, tell me what you think. What is your individual obligation to help those who don't have? What do you think? You don't have to tell me your position, just tell me some thoughts about what you think about that kind of question. What's your obligation? You walk by a poor person. What's your obligation to help? And where does that come from? Thoughts? Yeah.
I think it varies per person, but it's usually established based on people's backgrounds, like what type of families they came from, what type of communities they grew up in, and what they were taught, like personal morals.
Yeah, going off that, I think that I feel personally like I would feel like I need a target audience that doesn't have as much as I do. That would be like my first priority, and it has to do with how you were raised and like your morale.
So it's a little bit of your own culture and your own family.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there were some projects I worked on where most of the people who actually needed the technology were the ones that had no access to the technology, right? Like some of the areas that I worked in Louisiana, a huge diabetic population, but most were just basic phones, not smartphones. And brought a lot of Silicon Valley people over there to try to solve it. They gave up after a month. They said it wasn't worth their time.
Right.
And yet these are the people that needed their help the most.
I think it's a tough question. I mean, obviously there's a whole bunch of things you got to solve before the technology issue, right? It's not just technology. I guess that's the bottom line. But on the other hand, if you don't give them technology, they'll never climb out, maybe never climb out of where they are. So it is a big issue. It's something you should think about. I don't know that there's an easy answer, but I think that these gaps exist for sure. And the other interesting aspect of that is, you know, you go like, look at the internet. You know, it started in the U.S., ARPANET, went over the world. You look at internet in other countries and you go, okay, is this the technology we're giving them? Because everywhere the internet goes, they become Western, right? 50% of internet is in English, right? So you're gonna diminish all the native cultures. So everybody's forced to speak English. Everybody's forced to look at Western content. So some people are saying, you know, maybe we shouldn't do that. But that's not a simple issue either, because if it helps people with getting food and water, you know, developing sustainable economies, you can't stand on the principle of saying, oh, their culture is so important we can't touch it. You know, translate everything into that language and things like that. So it is an issue, and you think, the more I think about it, the more, you know, it gives you a headache, you know, basically. So, but it's a good thing to think about. Here's another one, do it yourself. Nowadays, and you'll find this to be true when you get into the workplace, you're gonna be asked to take more and more responsibility for your own health care, you know, choosing your health plan provider, your doctor, making decisions of what you should do. And so, it's interesting because I showed you a couple of tools like the pulse oximeter. They used to be professional tools for doctors only. Now you can buy them. Now you can buy them, and so they become consumer tools. And so what does that mean? That means that there's actually a whole market that's growing now of quote semi-professional tools, semi-professional healthcare, which is where the patients they look up WebMD and they look up things. And they buy stuff that's professional stuff, and they take care of themselves. The problem is, who's accountable for that? And so the government wants you to do that because they think it'll save on healthcare costs. Because if you spend the money yourself, you're going to save money, but you may not spend it wisely, right? So the jury is out. But when the patient comes to a doctor and says, you know, doctor, I want to do this and not that because I've done my research. And they do that, and it doesn't work. Who's responsible? Well, in America, they'll probably sue the doctor. Right? They're going to say, you didn't persuade me enough to go the other way. It's your fault. And in a sense, it's true, right? Because they're not doctors. So that's a big issue, right? It's a big issue. So it's patient empowerment. You hear that phrase, patient empowerment. You hear it a lot. It means different things to different people, but just realize it's probably not empowering the patient. It's actually transferring responsibility to the patient, but not control. I think that's the key lesson that they're starting to find out. And you'll have to make those decisions yourself as well. And so, the next one is sort of social relationships. And there was a famous study that was done about how many friends do people typically have. It was done by somebody named Robin Dunbar. Have you guys heard of that guy? Robin Dunbar? He did a study where he tried to figure out what's the maximum number of people you could have as friends. You know, this is pre-internet. And he came up with a number 150. That's called the Dunbar number, which is very interesting. And within that, 50 people you consider close friends, 15 people you consider friends that you can talk about anything to. So there's different levels, but the main number is the 150. And it turns out that in social networks, that's also true. You usually have about 100 to 200 people that you would call your casual friends. And everybody else, like in LinkedIn or Facebook, expands that, but then the price of that is what? You have a lot more superficial relationships, and you spend time, you know, like keeping those up. So you're keeping track of a lot more people that you can physically keep track of at the cost of your deep relationships, because you don't have more time for those guys. So there is a changing dynamic in terms of social networking, and it's worrisome. People found out that kids who are deprived of touch and physical relationships, when they grow up, they actually never recover that. They lose those social skills. So in the future, when we have kids who grow up mostly in the virtual world like this, everything's remote, and they never have the experience. Like, here's an example. Let's say you're in a school, and you get bullied, right? Somebody bullies you. Bullies right in your face. So you have to learn how to cope with that, right? You have to have self-control or whatever you learn to react to that physically. In the cyber world, what happens when somebody bullies you? You just unlike them, right? you just pull the cord, they're gone, right? So you never learn those skills, which is interesting, right? So the question is that good or not for a society? I think that's a very interesting question. The other thing they also found is when you touch somebody, it sets off endorphin release. So you actually feel very good. When you touch somebody, even light touch, it turns out there's a special receptor for very light touch. Light touch just boosts your endorphins. So endorphins is a pain relief hormone, right? So it makes you feel very good. So the touch piece, of course, you don't activate it when you're online unless they figure that out in the future. I don't know. But that is also something to think about because there is a lot of concern that kids are not learning how to interact properly in a social setting. Any thoughts about that? I know you guys use a lot of online tools, and so do I. Is that something that makes a difference? Do you think you maintain healthy relationships despite that? What do you think? How's your, do you have two different categories of people that you see in person and people you don't? Or does it kind of blend?
I think it definitely, if you only, like if you have a friend that's like only online, it's really hard. It's a lot harder to like get really close to them because you have to talk to them nonstop over messaging or something to really get to a point where you would trust them. Whereas in person, since you can see them, you can see their facial reactions to like what you're saying, like their response is genuine or that it's not, and it's a lot easier to make those relationships. Like in person, there's just like there's not like a screen or the internet between you because you are also taught to like be wary of like people who are fake or like not real people pretending to be other people. So it's a lot easier to make friends and close relationships in person, but having the internet is also really helpful when that person moves to like New York or something because then you can still talk to them, whereas previously it would have been a lot harder to keep in touch.
Yeah, and with the think about the Dunbar numbers in the past, if they move away, they drop out of your radar. You don't see them again, you don't think about them. But LinkedIn reminds you, LinkedIn says, oh, guess what? This person has a new job. Okay, congratulations. That kind of thing. It's a different kind of relationship, Over here somewhere. No?
I think it's very interesting, but I was wondering, like, is there anything like clinically wrong with having only those kind of relationships? Because I'm not sure people who like maintain mostly online relationships, if they themselves would consider themselves like unhealthy or.
Well, it's kind of like, I think if you grew up in that environment, you wouldn't know any better. It's like everybody does it, And I could see a day coming when a lot of the education will be online, it'll be virtual. So what you learn, it's a lot more, it's a lot broader, but it's also you lose some of the relational things you need to learn as a human being as you grow up. So does that make you a better manager, let's say, if you join a company, or a worse manager because you don't know how to manage people, you can't turn them off, that kind of thing. I think it's a really good question, and actually, it's interesting. I have a friend who went to Yahoo. He was in my MBA class. He's probably in his 40s now. The reason he went to Yahoo, he had a long career in biotech. The reason he went to Yahoo, he told me, was because they needed adult supervision. Because it's like, the guys that are so young, had no clue about things. And so he had a lot of experience managing people and stuff, and that was very important. But the folks that are mostly engineers and mostly online, they don't relate to other people, they're sort of isolated. And in fact, have you guys seen the movie Surrogate? Have you heard of it?
Mm-hmm.
Surrogate is a movie about two people that send their avatars, their robots, to work. and the robots represent them, and they can sit at home and really do the real work. So the avatars do all the interrelational things. You know? It's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. I hope we don't get to that level because I think it'd be a little bit poorer for it, but it's interesting to think about. So I mentioned about touch. The next area is jobs, and that's a big issue. Some of the technologies we adopted for Kaiser did displace jobs, so we did have to talk to the unions. It's interesting, with the Industrial Revolution, think back that far, they introduced automation, automated manufacturing, displaced a lot of people. They had to learn different skills. And eventually they went up the ladder, and today, most of us are going to be knowledge workers. You know what a knowledge worker is? We do the work in our heads. It's all thinking instead of manual, lifting things. So a lot of us are knowledge workers. Well, what's happening in technology is that, like with IBM and other folks, people are going to be taking those things away from you. The knowledge worker, those judgment things that are higher order judgments and decisions, stuff that you need to have, quote, human skills and experience to do, machines are going to be looking at mass data and being able to come up with recommendations that are actually better than what you as a human being can do. So that raises serious questions, because that's not that far from now. Right? Serious questions. What's the future of the human being, right? What is our role? We created it. Do we always have to screen the decision to make sure it's okay? I think it's interesting because it's like it's moving up the ladder so that even the doctors, for instance, there's one app, for instance, that compared to ER docs, when you make decisions of diagnosing somebody, it's better. It's better. So you can't argue with that, right? If you're a patient going to the hospital, you want the best skilled entity possible. So this does raise a lot of questions. The research firm Gartner says that by the year 2025, 1 out of 3 jobs is going to be taken by software or a robot. That's 1 out of 3. Of course, they say that because they want to get more publicity, but that's pretty scary. So what kind of jobs do we want to get to? That we have a livelihood, and what's the value of a human being? What are the new kinds of jobs that we should aim for? Something to think about. Here's a really weird area, tissue engineering. In fact, I just talked to a startup 3 days ago at a Canadian trade fair. They do bioprinting, printing tissues for a 3D printer, with a microfluidic head. They could print, they're working on printing skin, they're printing respiratory tissue. That's amazing, when you think about it. To create tissue out of nothing, essentially out of cells, and not have to transplant it from somebody who's dead, There's also people talking about implanting electronics and even growing human cells and animal cells together, which, if you think about it, that is so weird. Animals with human DNA. You start thinking, is that another class of human? Do they have rights? Raises some really weird questions, right? Things that you would never thought would come up. Like, what is the value of a human being? What is so special about human beings? Let's say we have robots doing work and they have consciousness. Do they have rights? That's kind of weird, right? What if they had human DNA in them? So there's a lot of these kind of issues that people actually, they either think about or they're going full steam ahead and doing whatever they want to do. Human cloning, it's been discussed. Let's say your child dies in an accident, you take some of the cells and you clone them, right? That's weird, because, do you want to live forever? Those kind of issues are going to happen because we know that when they talk, it's funny, I read articles where they talk to these guys that are doing this kind of research, and the scientists will say, oh, there's laws against that, When's that ever stopped anybody? Somewhere in some countries, somebody's trying to clone a human, right? So the question is, what are we creating a subclass of menial workers? That is scary. So I think those kind of things, those kind of things are going to be issues, I think. And for instance, there's people experimenting with, can we make your eyesight much better in the dark by putting some insect genes into your DNA? can we make your skin fluoresce so you can be seen in the dark by putting in some special kinds of genes from plants or whatever? And they're doing it with animals. They fluoresce. They're green. So, very strange. I bet people do it just for design. And in fact, the whole issue about augmenting human beings, is it ethical to give yourself such an edge, become a superhuman? You can do things nobody else can do. It's kind of like super steroids, We've decided that steroids are not fair, they're not good. And maybe someday we'll change that, but we could do this genetically today. Is that ethical? Is that something a place where we want to get to? That's why I think I get concerned a bit about this. Not so much because I think we'll figure it out, but I don't think a lot of people are even thinking about it. And I think we need to start doing that. The issue of immortality, do you want to live forever? And there's an interesting argument about this, which is, a lot of healthcare is about helping you live longer. But what if people lived forever? What would happen? Well, maybe they wouldn't want there to be a lot of babies, because babies would be new humans that consume resources, so the birth rate may go down, right? They may decide, I'm happy with doing what I'm doing, so I'm not going to create, I'm just going to live. So I think it's interesting because the cycle of birth and death gives vitality to a society. Right? When you take that away, all of a sudden there's no new ideas, and no new creativity, no changes, no possibility for changes. I think that's interesting debate, and I don't think we'll ever get to immortality, but it's an interesting question. And finally, here's one that a lot of the top, even the tech people are very worried about, which is, are we creating a super intelligence? Eventually, there's going to be enough computing power that you have a machine in charge of things that's going to be smarter, more capable, can make better decisions. And is that machine going to be friendly to humans? This is actually starting to happen. For instance, people are using massive computing power to decide, where to allocate resources in this country. Where do we put public health resources, right? How do we use them most efficiently? How do we get people to be okay with that? So having a machine to do it means partly that you can blame the machine, but it also is scary in terms that you don't know what the machine is thinking. It really is beyond your capability. So a lot of these folks are now saying, we should think about this and before we start doing this kind of stuff. Have you guys read, I don't know if you're supposed to read, but have you read the book called Brave New World? Aldous Huxley, what's the premise of that book? Do you remember? Yeah.
Something about it's kind of a dystopian in the sense that it's in the future and they're simplifying so much that people are almost mindless.
But they're happy, right? They're happy.
They're happy.
Yeah,
It's very
they take happy drugs, and the master computer sort of manages everything so that they're happy, but nothing changes. It's like a sterile happiness, right? And you kind of wonder. It's a value thing, right? Is it good to be just happy all the time? Well, maybe not. So, but anyway, I think those are really, really good issues to think about. I'll probably give you a presentation sometime. There's some reading, you can make additional reading. This is a good book, a textbook to read. Ronald Sandler's book that just came out. But otherwise, I think it's good to think about these things. I think a lot of them will probably become clearer or clarified over time. But I think it's hard to say today, what to think about this. But it's good to think about it because I think when you hear things like, oh, this is like the best thing since sliced bread. If you want a wiser perspective, you need to think about some of these other issues and really go into it with the eyes open. So, appreciate your participation in the evening. Any questions?
I got some questions for the class, actually. So how does this make you guys think about 10 years from now? Do you guys still want to be doctors? How many? Raise your hands. Just curious. Who still want to go to med school? 2. This is a lot less than I saw the first day. Has anything changed in the way you guys perceive what? Do this. Has anything changed in a way that you guys have perceived how medicine might be 10 years from now than it is today. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I think at some point we might be competing with the other artificial intelligence on who will give the better recommendations for the patients. And of course, that might lead to less jobs. So it's a little something to worry about. That one, can you do as good of a job as you thought you originally could do? And two, if not, you might not work in this practice anymore.
Right.
Well, just to counter that, one way to think of it is we're competing with AIs for jobs, but another way to think of it is AIs are freeing us from doing other things.
Okay.
So it gives another potential to do even more exciting or better things. That's the other side.
Yeah, that's a good point. The question is, what is that though? What is the way that physicians are trained is still the same old way they've been trained the last 100
right.
years, so they're still trained to do the same things. And really, I haven't been impressed that even new graduates can be much more sophisticated about the changes that are happening in medicine. So it's like in IT, if you ever go into the technology world, things change every 2 years. You may be an expert in a certain technology, then you have to start reading up on the next one and try to guess where that one is because you won't have a job after a couple of years. And that kind of rate of information is happening in medicine as well. I remember 5 years after I left medical school, everything I learned was false. So it was really amazing, and many doctors will say that. All the recommendations change, all the techniques change. So then, what is the role of the doctor? Is it to keep a human safeguard on things so that things don't make sense? Then you can say, hold on, you advocate for the patient. You're a patient advocate. You can't beat the computer on memory or processing. You can't beat them on finding things in a haystack. So I think that's a really interesting question. And so, for instance, Kaiser started a medical school recently, and their whole thing was, how do we train doctors so that they fit into the technology of the future, not the technology of the last century?
Yeah.
And that's a good question.
Does someone over here have a question too?
She left.
Oh, she left. All right. Okay, too bad.
Got a question. Yeah. So ultimately, all the amazing technology that you presented on, that raises a ton of ethical questions that we tried to summarize towards the end. Ultimately, who do we feel would be responsible, or who do you feel would be responsible for setting the standards? Obviously, I think the government is always going to be a little bit behind. Is it incumbent upon consumers to make those decisions, or are we expecting like board of directors or executive level of companies to be the ones that are thinking this out? I think the article had like engineers, training engineers, but quite honestly, I don't think we shouldn't be relying on them to decide whether the technology that they're developing is ethical or not.
Well, in America, the way things get decided is that crises happen, and then people really sit down and think about it. So the problem with that is it's a problem by problem basis. So for instance, what happened after the attacks in 9/11? There's a Patriot Act. Patriot Act, all of a sudden you can start surveilling everybody without any warrant. That was in a understandable response to an issue. But that sort of opened up the floodgates for violation of liberties, right? I mean, you can imprison somebody and without any due process, and for years, without any charges, just on suspicion of what they did. So those kind of things, it's sort of like, the problem with that is there's no overriding policy, ethical policy. It's interesting, in Europe and other countries, they've done that actually for privacy, for instance. They have it in the European Union, they actually have a government policy that's very strong on guarding your privacy. We don't have that in this country because we tend to react to things. Now, who should take the proactive step? I don't know. We don't have a strong ethics kind of body or anything. And until it becomes an issue, most of the time it's framed in the language of economics. So an insurer would say, we want information because it's going to help reduce costs and increase quality of care, those kind of things. So those are reasons given, but sometimes that's the wrong way to decide ethical issues. Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot of really promising emerging technologies, but you also mentioned that there was a very strong divide between the haves and the have-nots.
that's sort of the greatest good versus, you know,
Yeah.
your target market kind of thing. And, it's basically gonna be driven by whoever can make more money. That's the way that people run in the US. Unless the government says something, the government says, this is strategically, we need to do this. But, and they try to do it, but the government's not the best organization to do that. So I guess it's not an easy answer. Right now, I'm involved in a number of international groups looking at technologies for healthcare in other countries. And those governments are very eager to do something to improve healthcare. And they want to do it cheaply, of course, because they don't have a lot of resources. They have money, but not a lot of money. So the kind of innovation is very different. And it's driven by local needs and local resources. So, it's not like we have an obligation. They probably know better than us how to go over and improve things. For us in this country, we have a digital divide between the poor and the rich, the rural and urban and so on and so forth. And I know that there are people trying to equalize that and putting internet, high-speed internet everywhere and things like that. But in our country, the poor are just relatively poor. They're not really poor. I grew up in Malaysia. I know what really poor is. In this country, poor means you still can eat. You can find food, which is not really true in other countries. So relative poor then is a question of value judgment. What is enough? What is enough access? What is enough opportunity? Does everybody need state-of-the-art, most expensive MacBook? No, right? Then where does that breakdown?
Do you think doctors are losing value?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's interesting, in the latest healthcare debate, they were the only party that's not at the table. And nobody represented them. So now they're all joining organizations. So they're becoming employees. That's a big trend. So I think doctors are going to be like senior advisor, expert, mentor type people. But your healthcare team is going to be a nurse, a nurse practitioner, and other kinds of folks that are less expensive. So the doctors going to be used better, probably for their experience and expertise. And hopefully technology will free them from doing the mundane things. But in the future, I think their main role is going to be the advocate and really the representative of the patient. Because the patient doesn't understand what's going on. So they need to trust somebody human, not an avatar, somebody real. And trust has a lot to do with how well you do with healthcare yourself.
So do you think that means less people our age will go into that profession? Maybe there will be less talent in that industry?
I think there's going to be, that's the same question as for lawyers, as for lawyers today, they have programs that can do searches. It used to take a lawyer 10 hours to do it in a couple minutes. That kind of technology, you kind of wonder, what's the work of a lawyer or a doctor when you can have tools that do that? And I think that's a tough question, right? I think there's always going to be a need for physicians that I can see because they are the human part of it, so they relate between the human and the technology. So they translate, they make sense of things for the patients. But as far as, and maybe for some manual things, until we get super surgical robots, you have to do some manual things. But, all that, there's nothing theoretically that says a machine can't do that either. So, I think it's a good question. I don't know where the real answer is. I think that's something that physicians of the future will evolve, and people will find out this is what physicians are needed for. Because the free market actually does work. So there's a lot of demand for physicians that go personally to the door and treat patients in their home. That's where the market will go. Right? There's a lot of demand for physicians to supervise other people that do the manual things. That's where the market will go. So it depends a lot on what technologies come out and how fast they gain acceptance.
Got a follow-up question to that. That's a great point to bring up. What does that mean, I think, for the employment then? Like you spend $500,000 to go to medical school, easy, and that's now. So that's what it's going to be like when you guys go through. What does it mean for employment if most of your healthcare team is going to be like nurse practitioners, PAs? Does that mean that your employment opportunity shrinks now as a physician to be able to pay back that loan? And what does that mean if, beyond 2025, 35, 45, right?
So, what happens is that, let's say the demand goes down, then your salary will go down. That matches the demand. It's interesting, that in medicine, the difference between a general practitioner and a super specialist, it's not just a little bit, it's huge, it's multiples, right? A physician coming out of school, making $150,000. But let's say a neuro-ophthalmologist coming out of fellowship will make $600,000. Just multiples. So that will depend, depending on the supply, right? So if you don't need so many primary care, everybody's going to go towards the super specialists because they can maintain a better lifestyle, they can pay off the loans and stuff like that. So the shift in specialists will occur, I predict. I'll be gone before that happens. And maybe there'll be new specialties like they're using technology, let's say robots, certain types of robots. It's a very technical kind of skill, so it's a surgical skill. Maybe those kind of things will happen. So you need new physicians to specialize in those things. So a lot of it is going to be driven by supply and demand. I think physicians probably will be earning less, unfortunately, for the years that they spend and the loads they take out. On the other hand, if there's less demand, there'll be fewer people going into it to do other things. So it's going to balance out. Let's end on a happy note. No. I think if you're going into it for a right reason, it's not an issue.
All right. Just to let you guys know, next week we have Faiza Hai and Dan Weinberg coming in. They're from former vice president of Kaiser's Advanced Innovation and Technology Department, and also their Advanced Nursing Technology Department. So they'll be talking about things. Let me see if we can get it right here. Their topics will be on areas concerning things like personalized genomics, digital assistants, designer drugs, and of course chronic conditions and changing insurance policies. Okay?
Did everyone sign in?